Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. Today I'm joined by a special guest, Courtney Werning. Courtney is the principal at Meyer Wilson Werning, one of the country's leading investor rights law firms and the driving force behind the firm's cryptocurrency litigation practice. She has spent her career representing investors who have been harmed by financial institutions, scams, and securities fraud, recovering millions of dollars for victims. Courtney currently serves on the board of directors of PIABA and on FINRA's National Arbitration and Mediation Committee. Today, we're going to discuss two important topics impacting investors today: crypto's dirty secret, the risks and failures within crypto platform and exchanges, and why Gen Z may be uniquely vulnerable to crypto fraud despite growing up in a digital-first world. Courtney, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
So maybe we can start off with just a little background on yourself and your journey into securities law, investor advocacy, and eventually specializing in cryptocurrency litigation.
Sure. So I've been a practicing attorney for, I think, 13 or 14 years now, and my entire career has been devoted to representing investors who have claims against financial institutions. Most of it for the course of my career has been against, United States-based brokerage firms or investment advisory firms for things like negligent selling of securities, sometimes Ponzi schemes, sometimes broker theft, sometimes, misrepresentation or omission of material facts, sort of what I would call like my bread and butter of like investment misconduct cases. And then we've seen a shift in the landscape of the people who are calling us and the types of investment losses that we're seeing from the traditional securities in the markets to more digital assets. And so over the last couple of years, we've sort of dove in 2 feet first into cryptocurrency cases against cryptocurrency exchanges, a variety of cases against US-based brokerage firms for pig butchering losses and things like that, the money coming out of the brokerage firms, and some of these cybersecurity breaches and failures on the cryptocurrency exchange level. So been doing it for 13 or 14 years now and wouldn't want to be doing anything else. It's sort of a small area of the law that not a lot of people know about. Not a lot of people realize that there are good claims to be had when you suffer investment losses, that as the result of somebody's misconduct. Part of what we do is trying to figure out, okay, whose misconduct and what happened.
Yeah, I mean, the topic was interesting to me. I'm seeing it more and more common of people coming to me and saying, oh, I lost this money, whether it was a brokerage just freezing their account and saying, sorry, can't have access to your money, or someone actually stealing the crypto out of their account.
Yes, we've seen some account takeover cases as well, completely not accessible, at least not in terms of the account holder accessing it, but an outside entity coming in. And that's really where we see sort of the security protocol breaches, the red flags that should have been raised in terms of who's going in there and making those trades or making those withdrawals, and really nothing being done to stop it.
I think when a lot of people hear about crypto fraud or investors losing money in crypto or digital currency, they often just assume, oh, you just made a bad decision, there was market risk and it happened. But what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about crypto-related losses?
I think you're right in terms of people view it as a highly speculative investment, and it is. It's crazy volatile. It's very risky. However, the treatment that a customer is owed is like the same duty of care that any customer of any business is owed. And you have to operate within like commercial reasonableness, right? They owe a duty of care to their customers. So you're making a choice to invest in something that, yes, is risky, but you still have the right to be protected in terms of appropriate account protocols, security protocols. In fact, what they tell their customers, like we know that Coinbase told Congress and markets itself as having bank level security. And we are often argue that they don't. The misconception is that, hey, I invested in whatever digital asset and I lost the money in it. Okay. And that happens as a result of market forces all the time. And that's not something that's actionable. However, if you lose money because you were the victim of a social engineering scam or the victim of an account takeover or a phishing scheme or something like that, then it's worth looking into it to say, hey, were these protocols met? Sometimes they were. Or was this something more nefarious in terms of these social engineering scams that we see? Sometimes they're insider jobs. So you get an actual employee at one of these cryptocurrency exchanges selling customer data or, doing whatever they're doing themselves to the customer accounts. So it's not as simple as people think. Hey, I lost the money. There's nothing to be done. And sometimes there isn't anything to be done. But taking a wider look at it and seeing, was the duty of care to me as a customer met? That's an important question that, somebody like me can answer.
How does it start? So, obviously someone loses money. I guess they log into their account, or if they can't even log into their account, but they notice that there's been something going on. They lost money. What's their option from the start? And then how do you get involved in some of these cases?
So, the first thing that's important if you realize you've been either the victim of a scam, you've transferred the money and it didn't go to where you thought it was going to go. Let me back up and say, we do a lot of these social engineering scam cases. Once, just for example, Coinbase had a very large data breach last year where a bunch of customer data was stolen and then it was used to perpetrate social engineering scams on the customers. So it's a Tuesday afternoon, you get a call from somebody that's identifying themselves as Marcus from Coinbase Security, and your account's being hacked and we need to move it to a safe wallet to protect you. And they know everything about your account. They know your recent transactions. They know how long you've been a customer. Lends itself to the credibility of the situation. You think, oh my gosh, I was about to lose all my money. Thank you. And then you follow the instructions and it turns out that's just a scam. And I've seen this time and time again that this happens. And then they do reach back out to the exchange and they say, this was a fraud. Can you undo it? Help me, please. And for the most part, these exchanges say, sorry, we can't help you. Once the money is gone, it's irreversible. And that's true. That's completely true. Once the money leaves on the blockchain, there's no undoing or reversing those transactions, which is part of why this is like a scammer's paradise, right? You can't get the money back. It's not just sitting in a bank account that can go be seized. It's gone. So shutting down the account, the exchange will do that rather quickly. Contacting law enforcement, filling out your IC3 FBI report. The problem with the IC3 FBI report is that it's really more about like data collection, because the FBI is chasing down so much of these cryptocurrency losses. If you lost $200,000, $300,000 in crypto, that's a tremendous amount of money for one person to lose. But the FBI are focusing on wallets that might have, $1 billion of crypto in it. So they don't have the manpower to chase down and try to seize the assets for these smaller claims. But filing the report is still important, because if they get notice that a particular wallet or a particular scheme is getting a lot of attention and there's a lot of people complaining about the same thing, then they might be able to go and do something there. But what I'll tell you is that the law enforcement and the reporting and the locking down the account are all very important steps that everybody should take if this happens. Keep the device you were working on. Keep any trail, any communications that you have about the account, maintain all of those documents. But the reality is, it's very unlikely that you're going to get your money back as a result of those steps, right? It's going to take that additional step of reaching out to a securities lawyer or crypto lawyer to say, hey, this happened to me. Is there something that we can do about it to try to get this money back? The other thing I'll say is, people that have been scammed and lose their money in this way are oftentimes the victim of a second scam, which is like the recovery scam. So they're like, they panic. I've lost my money. I'm desperate to get it back. And then somebody swoops in. It's like, I'm a recovery service. Pay me $25,000 and I'll go chase down your Bitcoin. And they'll do it because they're desperate, right? Oftentimes it's the same scam. It's the second part of the scam. It's just another way to extract money from these people. In fact, I am literally right now representing somebody in a case against Fidelity who emptied their IRA out in like one day, and Fidelity's like, yep, good to go, put it into crypto. And so they send all their money into this scam. So we're doing that case now from like a red flags basis on the Fidelity side. But then the client just reached out to me and was like, somebody told me if I pay $25,000, I can, they have a good shot of getting the money back. And I'm like, please don't do that. Don't do that. Like, you're going to be throwing good money after bad money. And I'm quite sure that they're not going to be able to get your money back. That's the whole part of this process with these digital assets, is that it's irreversible, and it's been through 2,000 wallets and a crypto mixer and a decentralized exchange, and you're never going to get it back. So I would just caution anybody that's been a victim of this type of thing from then sinking into the second part of the scam of like, I'm just going to pay anybody to do anything to try to get this money back. A good lawyer that's doing this type of work, like what we do it on a contingency fee basis. We're not charging any money. You're not going to have to pay us anything. We're only paid if we end up recovering some money on your behalf. So I hate to see people kind of pour more money into, what's already a tremendous amount of loss for these people.
So when you get involved, is it mostly looking at like the Fidelities or the Coinbases or the brokerage or exchanges, or is there any ever getting to the end person who's originating?
The actual scammer, the actual criminal?
Yeah, the actual scammer.
No, I wish. I've never tried it because you really can't find these people.
Do you think they're mostly in the U.S. originating or from outside of the U.S.?
No, I think they're mostly outside of the U.S. So if you've ever looked into how these types of criminal enterprises work, they're mostly in like South Asia, and they have like big, huge compounds of people who, unfortunately, themselves are often the victims of human trafficking. So the people who are in there, doing the hacks and doing the communications for these long con scams are typically victims of human trafficking themselves. They're forced to do this, which makes the whole thing even worse. But yeah, these types of scams generally originate overseas. The money ends up going back overseas through decentralized exchanges where the money is going to become untraceable. And it's working on a tremendous level. There's like $22 billion worth of cybersecurity losses from 2025. The IC3 report just came out earlier this year. AI now has its own category of losses. The FBI is now attributing AI-driven scams into its own category for the very first time. We've seen an explosion of growth, obviously, in the technology that's making this all, more legitimate looking. There's no more like sort of misspelled emails that you get and you click on a phishing link because but you really shouldn't have because it's all misspelled and jumbled and whatever.
Right.
This all looks very professional, and then AI is helping scammers do that.
Yeah. Now I know Gen Z is the target a lot of this because they're probably using digital currency a lot more than other groups. But are there any other reasons why Gen Z is targeted for these types of scams?
Yeah, so I gave that some thought, Mark. And, we typically represent older Americans that lost money. And the only reason we do that is because when an older person gets scammed, it's usually on a much bigger level in terms of dollars, right? They've got a big nest egg. They usually have accumulated savings for retirement, and that's what they're relying on. And they're targeted because they have the money to lose. And so, if you've lost a tremendous amount of money, you're likely an older person. But the statistics show that while older Americans get scammed out of more money, the younger people are getting scammed more often. And I asked myself, why would that be happening? Because we're talking about a group of digital natives. So you would think to yourself, surely they would be more equipped to identify sort of the red flags of scams, or be able to utilize better security protocols to protect themselves. And I don't have a real answer. My guess is that they have a little bit of a less skeptical air than maybe our older population. Our older population is really more used to dealing with people face to face, the old transactions, right? They'd go to the bank and talk to the bank teller to get their money out. They'd be talking to a wealth advisor about making investments. That's not Now, I'm generalizing there because we certainly handle a lot of older American cases that got scammed via a direct message online. But overall, I think they just tend to be a little bit more skeptical of the people around them. Whereas maybe the digital natives, the younger population that has dealt with their lives just very online in a very public way, that maybe they're just less skeptical about the people they meet online, the things that they're doing online. They have no problem clicking on a direct message from somebody else. So I think that might be part of what's driving it. There's also, it's more, when you're talking about cryptocurrency investments, I think it's just more accepted mainstream amongst the younger population as well. Kind of like FOMO, they don't want to get left behind. This is the new hotness, right? It's becoming more mainstream. We're seeing now in Congress the market structure type legislation to try to establish, hey, like who's going to regulate this? And so it really is becoming, it's kind of at the forefront of everybody's mind. And I think they've been raised with it as being an option, as being out there, as being something that they can use to buy and sell things. And so perhaps a little bit less of a skeptical air about the type of crypto that they're getting into and what that leads to. I do have a very diverse group of clients. I have your 93-year-old lady who, I just represented somebody who lost $1.5 million in a government impersonation scheme, took all of her money out of her brokerage account and put it into like Bitcoin ATMs to a scammer's wallet. It was horrible. Went on for like a month, took basically all of her money. And then on the other side of that, I have these super aggressive crypto traders who did want to lean into cryptocurrency and had been doing it for many years and then suddenly become the victim of some kind of cybersecurity breach and lose their money that way. So it's been interesting, to say the least, on like the differences that I see amongst those two groups.
Yeah.
But it is statistically the case that Gen Z is being scammed more often than older Americans.
Yeah, I could see that trusting the digital space being a reason for that. My daughter's younger than being able to have a crypto account, but she's always asking me for approval through the phone to download this app. And I look at it and some of the things, aside from like, why would you want to spend your time with this app? Who knows what the app is doing, what it's, so you're older, you're a little more skeptical. I think when you're younger, you just grow up with it and you understand everything goes on in the digital space and you become comfortable with it. And then sometimes too comfortable.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, the scams are built inside the platforms they already use daily. So it feels very natural to them, I think.
Now, we're talking a lot about the social engineering scams. What about, maybe it's not a scam, but someone legitimately put some crypto assets on some kind of financial platform, and just one day the platform's like, oh, sorry, those assets are gone for whatever reason, whether they were fraud or whether the company, and the investor's thinking, wait a minute, this should operate like a bank. The financial institution shouldn't be allowed to just take freeze my assets. What can they do in that case? And then how do you get involved in a case like that?
Yeah. I think you're talking about the case where somebody has hacked into the account and either made trades or made withdrawals and the account owner doesn't even know. That happens. Like I have these cases now where perhaps it was, we're still trying to figure out exactly what happened on the back end, but there was like an API written into the customer's account that did a bunch of like thousands of trades in like 2 minutes. Clearly not a human and clearly not my client, like anything my client did. So the question becomes, how did somebody gain access to the account? And were there things that the exchange didn't do that they were supposed to do in a situation like that? And that's a really complicated analysis and often one that can't even be made just by looking at the facts. We deal a lot with like phishing links and like, how did you get the phishing link? And you clicked on it and then what happened, et cetera. And that's not just because somebody clicks on a phishing link doesn't mean that the financial institution doesn't have responsibility for what happens next, because they have, or they're supposed to have, protocols in place to detect crazy IP addresses, impossible travel, like something's coming from Russia and then Columbus, Ohio. Like there are systems that are supposed to write scripts to alert people when things like that happen and shut it down. So it often requires like a pretty intense forensic analysis of what happened at the back end. And we often don't know really what happened until we get into the account. I can identify the signs of the fraud and figure out sort of what happened there. But until you kind of file the case and get discovery from the other side and say, okay, here are the access logs, here are the amplitude records to see like what actually happened on the back end, and then tying that into a bow for whoever is deciding the case, usually an arbitrator, because these cases often proceed through arbitration, of like, what should the institution have done? And there has been some success in holding these institutions responsible, because you're right, they advertise themselves as, hey, we are the safest platform, we're the safest protocol there is. If you go out and Google, all 4 of the top by volume cryptocurrency exchanges that operate here, they're all like, we're the safest, we're the best. Well, if that's what they're telling their customers, then they actually need to be doing that. And the problem is that we haven't had a regulatory structure that actually will tell them what they need to be doing. And we're working on that. And that's, we're watching it closely as this develops, like who's going to be regulating this and what kind of investor protection protocols are going to be in place and what kind of audits are the regulators going to be allowed to do and things like that. So it's still developing, but I think it's fair to say that every customer of a cryptocurrency platform deserves due care. And our argument is frequently that whatever happened with the account, whether it was a password breach or an API access or whatever it is, it's something that they had the tools to prevent and the obligation to prevent and didn't do it.
So does it now fall under like the same Securities Act that, like your regular Fidelity account would fall under, or have there been any specific digital currency laws put into place?
No. So right now, going through Congress is what's called the Clarity Act to try to solve that question. The CFTC tried to take over some of the regulatory issues with various crypto platforms here, and they have done that. The SEC was also doing that as well, and using some enforcement actions to say, hey, this is an unregistered security, or you're operating as an unregistered broker dealer, or whatever. We saw that kind of with the administration change. We saw the SEC really fall back from that kind of sort of proactive approach of regulation through enforcement. In fact, we saw some large profile cases that were abandoned sort of halfway through. But hopefully we're going to get some clarity. It's called the Clarity Act, on who's regulating it, what these firms need to be doing. And my fervent hope is, and we've seen multiple versions of this, but my fervent hope is that there's going to be some sort of investor protection measure and mechanism in place to say, okay, this is all great in terms of who's regulating and what they need to be doing, but they also need to be protecting the customers. I'm looking for a private right of action for these types of failures, these breaches, like we have under the Securities Act. So the Securities Act of 1933, they've got civil liability provisions and a private right of action for when things go wrong and a security is illegally sold or whatnot. There's no reason why we shouldn't have that under this new crypto regime. So we'll see what comes out.
What are some things an investor can do to minimize the chance of being a victim of a scam or fraud or just losing their money, and whether that's evaluating the financial institution or some of these social engineering scams that take place?
Yeah, I think it's sort of multifaceted. I tell people that 95% of investment scams, this is across the board, not just crypto, start with an unsolicited direct message from some kind of social media platform. So if you're getting an unsolicited message, and it's like even a wrong number, oops, sorry, you've been targeted, and it's not accidental. And anything you get on social media in terms of a message, even if I think it's from you, Mark, I might get something on LinkedIn like tomorrow that I think is from you. And it's like, hey, click on the podcast link. Hope you enjoy it. And I click it, and it could be potentially be fraud. So just don't engage online with people that you don't know. And if you do think you know them, then you just need to verify their identity via another channel, something legitimate, phone call, email. We've seen a lot of these like AI deep fakes where like granddaughter is calling grandma and it's like an actual voice fake, which is crazy. And she's like, I need money, blah, blah, blah. I recommend like a family safe word. If there's anything that you would need money for at all, there should be a safe word that's associated with it that a scammer would not know, that AI would not know. That way grandma can say, is this really my granddaughter calling me being like, my car's been impounded, I need $300 or whatever it is. So that, and yeah, doing your investigation and making sure that you understand the platform that you're using, the people that you're dealing with. I caution anybody against doing anything that's like time sensitive. Legitimate opportunities are not time sensitive. You can take your time, you can slow down, you can do your research, figure out if this is legitimate. But if somebody's saying you've got 24 hours, you're going to lose the opportunity, that is a big red flag, not something somebody should do.
Right. What do you see going forward? I know you talked a little bit about some of the Securities Act and how investor will have some protection, but where do you see financial fraud going? And I guess, I think digital assets are going to become more and more involved just in our financial lives. So I guess it's only going to be worse going forward.
Yeah, this is going to sound terrible. I only see the problem getting worse. And I think lawmakers and regulators are trying to catch up with the criminals, but it's not fast enough because the speed in which they can work and versus the speed in which law enforcement and regulators and things can work is just so different. So I anticipate that the $22 billion number from 2025 is going to go up significantly in 2026. And I don't know really how to prevent the crisis, to be honest. We've opened the door to digital assets and AI, and it's all making it so much easier for people to be scammed out of their money. I think the real value going forward is going to be training frontline workers. So those people who work in banks, those people who work in brokerage firms and investment advisory firms, training them to recognize the signs of what's happening and strong sort of regulations and laws that give them the tools to stop it. So we see some of that already on the security side. We see temporary disbursement holds and trusted contact rule and a whole bunch of things that have empowered brokerage firms to step in and do something. And I think that is going to have to get stronger and better trained and just so more widely recognized. I can't tell you the amount of times where I have cases where customer empties their accounts in a series of escalating withdrawals in a short period of time for account that's never been touched for cryptocurrency investments. And the broker's like, I thought it was kind of suspect, but he wanted his money, so I let him have it. Like, that's not the standard. They need to do something. And I think just better training for those people to say, okay, I'm recognizing that there might be something suspicious going on. Here are my tools I can use. So we find that if the tools are used properly, they actually do work. So it's really about education, educating those frontline workers, educating the public. But I don't see the actual criminals going anywhere or slowing down.
Yeah, it's definitely scary. All right, Courtney, that's all the questions I have for you today. Thank you for joining me on an episode of The Agent of Wealth. Before we close, where can listeners go to learn more about your work or get in touch with you directly?
Sure. So we have a website. It's meyerwilson.com. You can go learn about what we do. You can fill out a contact form if you have any questions. That information comes to me directly, and I'd be happy to chat about whatever situation that you think you might have.
Great. We'll include all that information in the resources section of the show notes. Thanks again, Courtney, and thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Don't forget to follow The Agent of Wealth on the platform you listen from and leave us a review of the show. We're currently accepting new clients, and if you'd like to schedule a one-on-one consultation with our advisors, please do so at bautisfinancial.com/call.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.